Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my dear friend and co-host, Jake LaQuire. We, unfortunately, suffered a loss to the Cincinnati Bengals. Andy Dalton could not get a W against his former team, but we did see some bright spots, and I think it's good to kind of start the conversation about the Panthers games talking about those positives, because it has been very exciting the past 2 weeks to see a competent offense on the field.
Yeah, for sure. Before we get into any football stuff, I just want to acknowledge I know I have family in the area that was affected by Hurricane Helene. I'm sure a ton of Panthers fans are in around that area or have people they know that have been affected by that. So just want to talk about that first and just let everybody know that those people are in our thoughts and prayers as we move forward as a fan base and as like a region of the country that was affected by this, right? I think that's important to acknowledge before we get into like the football stuff, but there were positives for sure. Namely, the offense is moving. The offense moves the ball and it's clicking. I know you weren't the biggest Dave Canales fan once the hire was made. I was a bit hesitant myself. He'd only called plays for one season. I don't know. You never know if somebody has it, unless they have a wide breadth of experience. But I think he calls a good offense. And when we got a competent QB in there, Andy Dalton, it's really been working so far. The running game was on fire yet again when they're able to run the ball. That first drive, they moved the ball phenomenally well, I thought. It started with the first play, and then it was the Diontae Johnson down the left sideline for, I believe that was our longest passing play of the season. If not the longest, certainly the longest air yards wise. It's like 35, 40 air yards. And then we got down to the goal line, and we fell short. And then it was one of those games where it's like, oh, okay, this is going to happen. Yeah, we're losing today. But then we got back in the game. We clawed back and fought. And then in the end, it just came down to execution and the defense not being able to slow down Burrow very much. And it was a close game. I'm not one for moral victories, but it's nice to where I felt like even though they had scored 31, it was 34 by the end because they kicked the field goal with like a minute left. But even though they had scored that much, I felt like we could too. And that's a nice feeling.
Yeah, you can go tick for tack with the opposing team when it's going to be a shootout is a great feeling to have. And just watching us drive down the field on the first drive, coming up short there, coming up short again a little bit later on the game with a fake punt, and then just seeing a couple just untimely drops from key players, Diontae Johnson, Xavier Legette, Jonathan Mingo. You need those guys to continue to step up and make plays, especially when the defense is the sieve that it is. The highlight, kind of the positives, like you said, it was one of those games where it felt like within reach. And Parker Fleming did this previously with, and still does it with college teams, looking at net success rate and seeing how bad do you lose or win really. And the Panthers were one of four teams. Sam Hoppen has looked at it this current year. We were one of four teams in week 4 to have actually a positive net success rate. The other three teams being the Steelers, the Rams, and the Saints. 3 teams that could have won and should have won their games respectively as well. So again, a great feeling to have. We aren't going to play the defense that we've just faced in the Bengals necessarily anytime soon. The competition on the defensive side of the ball does go up as our season and schedule continues. So that's the only thing I'm going to be looking for. Can we take advantage of mismatches? And we were able to do that against Cam Taylor-Britt. I think he allowed around 83 yards, a touchdown, and probably would have allowed more yards had there not been drops.
Yeah, and if he were on the field more, he would have allowed more yards too. He had like a nagging injury there towards halftime and throughout the game. I think there are more positives as well. Xavier Legette, first career touchdown. You like his touchdown celebration? He was riding his horse all around the end zone back to the Dollar Bill. Crazy good name for a horse, by the way. You gotta love it. And everybody really got involved. That was something that I noticed. You talked about how all 3 of the receivers, Johnson, Legette, Mingo, all had timely drops, but they all had their moments in this game, I think. Diontae Johnson was all over the field. Again, Legette, he made use of his strength, I thought. He still needs to work on, I think, his body control in terms of at the catch point. But otherwise, I thought he did really well. And I think Mingo did well, too. We were talking before the recording about that one little pirouette down the sideline he had, down the right sideline. I was quite impressed with that. I didn't think like I'm a Mingo hater, right? And I didn't think he had that in him to like maintain that balance and get down the field for the first down, but he did. And I like that all three of them played well because as Adam Thielen continues to be out, as our tight ends aren't necessarily factored or a big factor in the passing game, we need all three of those receivers to play well. And speaking of receivers, Jalen Coker also got on the field for a bit. No catches, I believe. But it was cool to see him. He was a guy we were both a fan of, training camp practices and to make the initial 53. He's finally here with the injury, so hopefully he can take advantage of some of the stuff moving forward. That's about it for the positives. We get to the negatives. You talked about how the defense is a sieve. It's going to get even worse now, especially in the immediate future, considering Shaq Thompson is now out for the season, suffered an Achilles injury. Dave Canales yesterday in the presser said he's getting his surgery as soon as possible. So it's good to hear that he'll be have it repaired. And then he posted, I believe it was on Instagram, that something to the effect of, haha, retiring? Yeah, right, I'll be back. So I believe he is a free agent, but I'd like to see him back for at least one more year to where he can play more than 2 or 3 games, right? He and Taylor Moton, well, it's just him. He's the only one from that Super Bowl year. And then he and Taylor Moton, and I guess JJ Jansen are like the only guys in the old guard that are still on the team that really embody keep pounding. So hopefully he's able to make it back for one more year. We also have Josie Jewell, who's going to miss time, the other starting linebacker. So we're going to really be down to the depth of our linebacking room, and that includes rookie Trevin Wallace. What can he do? Dave Canales said he, once Shaq Thompson went out, he had the green dot on his helmet, which means he's calling the defense. We're going to be looking forward to a lot of Trevin Wallace in the coming weeks because that room's thin, and frankly, the whole defense is thin, but hopefully we can get some guys back coming off the PUP list that started the year soon.
Yeah, I mean, we lose Derek Brown after week 1. Now you lose a veteran captain on the defensive side in Shaq Thompson. The bright spots are that DJ Wanham and Dane Jackson could come back, and I think our secondary has played admirably, so adding a cornerback 2 into the mix could definitely help, especially when we saw what T. Higgins did. I thought Andre Yosabash would kind of be that funnel for the Bengals offense, the go-to target. And instead it was T. Higgins. He was able to kind of come back on a bunch of routes on J.C. Horn, who was playing a softer coverage, and just keep churning out yards and completions. And that helped them move the chains and keep the ball rolling on their side. And they racked up a lot of points because of that. And to your point about just the lack of depth on the defense, we bring in Charles Harris about a week or 2 ago, sign him completely a free agent. This guy's a little bit older as an outside linebacker, and Jamar Chase coming across the middle. Xavier Woods, obviously, instead of just trying to wrap up Chase, it tries to make a big hit, and Chase bounces off that. Charles Harris looks completely lost trying to tackle Chase, and before you know it, Chase is running down the sideline to score a touchdown. And it's those kind of plays that are demoralizing. We saw it all the time last year on the offensive side where we would just go 3 and out, or we'd have a turnover, and it's just like the head rolling and just the head shaking, the eye rolling, head shaking just on that side. And now it's just completely reversed to where we're doing really good things on offense, but we can't stop anyone on defense. And I don't see that really changing anytime soon, especially as the offensive competition gets better and better as the season goes on.
Yeah, it was all about effort and technique this game. I thought there were a ton of missed tackles, not just on the Jamar Chase long touchdown. I saw a tweet where it was like Xavier Woods wanted to be on one of the NFL hardest hits mixtapes on YouTube, but he just missed the hit, and that's why Chase scored there. But yeah, like you're saying, our defense is getting depleted. We've talked at length about how the talent level of this defense overall is probably, when everyone's healthy, is still probably bottom 5, bottom 10 in the league. So to have Derek Brown, who's your on-field leader, missing the rest of the season, Shaq Thompson, who's like one of the locker room and vocal leaders. Both of these guys are captains, right? That means your teammates voted for them, out for the year. As far as the other 2 captains go, Sam Franklin, camp injury, Bryce Young benched. So not the most well-rounded performative group so far, but hopefully some of the guys that we get back on defense, some of the people that we have to sign, because we will have to bring guys in with all of the these injuries piling, galvanize and give some juice to the defense that might be a bit beleaguered coming through 4 weeks. Through the first 4 weeks, we gave up 40 plus to the Saints. I think it was 26 to the Chargers. The Raiders, that score isn't as close as we like. I think it was 26 to the Raiders as well, but that was kind of fake. That was all garbage time. And then 34 to the Chiefs here, or excuse me, the Bengals. That's not sustainable, right? When you allow that many points per game. So something's going to have to change, be it maybe shift some of the players around schematically, bring in some new guys. I don't know, but like you said, we're going to be facing some tough offenses down the stretch. I know Caleb Williams hasn't really shown a ton in his young career, but maybe this is his get-right game. You never know. Yeah. So we'll have him. Then we'll have the Falcons, who their offense, we know who they are and like what they can be. And then I believe it's Washington
Saints
after that.
Washington. I'm just like before the bye, like you play some good offenses.
The only one that doesn't really concern me is the Denver Broncos, but you know what Sean Payton can do, right? So there are some tough offenses we have to face, and we're going to have to get it right. And I guess that kind of leads into my main takeaway of this game is, to me, Canales is stamped, all right? I have faith in what his vision for the offense can be. When he is stubborn about running the ball, it's successful. We're churning out yards. You have it written down here, 29 carries for 155 yards. That's 5.2, 5.3 yards per carry. Really good. Versus the Raiders, it was really good. So when we're able to run the ball and build the pass off of that, this offense can function now that we have a QB that's not timid, that's on his tiptoes, when Andy Dalton's there. That's my main takeaway. But can that overcome the defense? That's the question for me.
I don't think we can get in and win a shootout week in and week out. Again, kind of going back to a point earlier, are we going to play defenses like the Cincinnati Bengals? The Las Vegas Raiders have been known to not necessarily be as tight on the back end, and we were able to take advantage of that in the passing game with Andy Dalton. So when you look at kind of just the defenses we've played right now, it gets a little bit more worrisome when you have a couple defenses coming up that are going to play a little bit better, are going to be able to take away your 1A, 1B options. And so is Dalton going to have time to get through his progressions? And right now, our offensive line is doing exactly what we kind of constructed it to do. We reinforced the interior. We haven't had a lot of injuries. And I believe right now we lead the NFL in pressure rate allowed. And a lot of metrics show that we are a top 5 offensive line, which that's what we paid for. So that does open a lot of doors and avenues for Dave Canales' play calling. That does look like it's coming into form. And that's great to see. It just would have been good to see this with Bryce Young, where you can build kind of a future around that quarterback instead of a journeyman quarterback where you're going to have to end up replacing him moving forward. And that's definitely going to be conversations that we have later this episode. And then moving forward into the future is kind of what is the decision at that position? Because Frank Reich, for the longest time, was able to work with journeyman quarterbacks in Indianapolis, and then it finally blew up in his face. You're going to have to find your franchise quarterback that you can lean on in critical situations.
For sure. And as far as the immediate future goes, there's a bit of discourse on Twitter, and NFL media last night regarding Adam Schefter talking about possible trade targets for the Kansas City Chiefs, because Rashee Rice, their star young receiver, got taken out of the game on an interception. It was actually friendly fire. Patrick Mahomes trying to make it was really just a dumb play by Mahomes. He kind of slid into the guy trying to tackle. Rashee Rice was tackling me, slid into him, chopped his leg. They're still doing tests, but the fear is that it's an ACL injury. He's going to be out for the season. So they need a receiver, a number one receiver, because Hollywood Brown is out for the year, and Xavier Worthy hasn't really taken that leap yet. So there are names being thrown around. Amari Cooper was an interesting name. Adam Thielen was a name that was brought up. And then Diontae Johnson was the kind of the big name that Schefter brought up. And I believe his words were, it doesn't matter. He's not going to be there next year anyway, or he's gone after this year anyway. And that kind of stirred quite a bit of controversy on Panthers Twitter. I know where I stand as far as wanting Diontae Johnson and the options surrounding him going into the offseason. Where do you stand on Diontae Johnson being a Panther for the future?
Well, if we were to ship out Diontae Johnson, that means whoever becomes the number one wide receiver in the defensive eyes, whether that's Adam Thielen when he gets back, or Xavier Legette if he gets kind of put in more of an X receiver role, if a trade were to go down with Diontae Johnson. And I think that hinders his development. I think Xavier Legette kind of going up against kind of the cornerback 2, cornerback 3, allows him to work on and refine his game. I think talking about just his physicality, he does need to work on the catch point, but his ability, one of his better routes in college was kind of the out route, and just to be able to kind of lean into the cornerback and push off and give himself a little bit of leverage without necessarily drawing an offensive pass interference call is great. It's kind of what made him a viable option, I think, for the Panthers when they were watching film and going through the draft process with him. So I think that hinders his development if you ship him out. And then the other thing is this team is devoid of talent. I'm tired of like us getting to a point where it's like you have stars on both sides of the ball, and then you just go, we aren't going to pay them. Well, then it's like, who are you going to pay? And obviously we have a big investment in the offense of line and some of the other pieces around there. But when you have a wide receiver one, you should pay him, keep him on the team, and then build the defense through the draft. Do what a couple of these other defenses are doing around the league, where you pick up journeyman guys that are able to fill certain roles on your defense and build it that way. Build a culture on that side of the ball while you have a functional offense. And so I don't think it's smart to send Diontae Johnson off. The only way I would consider it is if you don't think he's going to get top money next year in the offseason, and it would net you around like a 4th round comp pick, maybe if you know for sure that Diontae Johnson has no desire or inclination to sign with you, then trade him now. Get as much as you can, because you know this year's a sunk cost. You know you aren't going to make the playoffs. You know you aren't going to win the division. So just kind of pack it in and get as many resources. That's the only viable argument. Otherwise, to me, for the development of other rookies and Xavier Legette, Jatavian Sanders, some of those guys, it's smart to have that guy.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I don't know if like the rest of Panthers Nation, but I'm sick and tired of trading away our good young players, right? Christian McCaffrey, he was injured here. He's injured now, but they almost won the Super Bowl last year. They were favored in every single game. The 49ers.
Steve Wilkes was their defensive play caller that year too, last year.
Looks like their defense kind of this year. Next up, who's next?
DJ Moore.
DJ Moore. Traded him in the deal to acquire the number 1 pick in Bryce Young. In that deal, you decide to not do Brian Burns. You decided to do DJ Moore instead, which directly hindered Bryce Young's development because he had to throw to Adam Thielen 109 times or something like that. Then you say, we'll pay Brian Burns after the season. This was Bryce Young's rookie season, right after we trade DJ Moore. We'll pay Brian Burns after the season. We don't need to pay him now. You don't pay him, and then you end up trading him for a 2nd-round pick, which through some finagling became Jonathan Brooks and the Rams' 2nd-round pick. That's a good bit of business there. We'll see how Jonathan Brooks is. And from my perspective, you basically traded Brian Burns' cap space for Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis. Like, price-wise, it about matches up. That's a win. Like, that's something I'm willing to do, seeing as how good the offensive line has played thus far. But when you have these consecutive first-round picks that are all hits, like we say, it's difficult. Marty Herney nailed him. I think McCaffrey was Skettleman, but that was a pretty easy one. You know, he was a superstar in college. When you have all these picks, then you trade them away, and then you also don't have good picks in rounds 2 through 7 in the draft to supplement your team, Scott Fitterer, you don't have a good team anymore of homegrown talent. The only people we can hang our hats on right now is Derek Brown, who is out for this season. J.C. Horn is very good, but hopefully he can play more than 10 or 11 games in a season. That's about it, right? Chuba Hubbard is there as well, who is really made himself into a super strong NFL running back. Where would you place him right now in the league? Like top 10 to 15?
Maybe 15. Like, if he were to hit the open market, I don't think like he's going to have a lot of like suitors, so to speak, from a contract
like
standpoint.
Skill wise, probably in that 10 to 15.
I might even say like 15, 20. Like, when we talk about like skill set for running backs, like I think there's a pretty long list, and especially with some younger guys that have been drafted recently. So that's just my opinion. Yeah. But again, you would include older guys like Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, who don't necessarily have a lot of like lifetime left from like a carry standpoint.
That's true. And I guess to get closer to my point, Diontae Johnson's the best receiver we have had since DJ Moore. And I know that's not a huge time loss or a gap right there, but do you guys not remember how bad last year was when we had to feed Adam Thielen every play? Mingo was kind of non-functional in the offense. DJ Chark was dropping everything, fumbling away the final game of the year, fumbling away the only touchdown we could have gotten. Now that we finally have a guy that we can go to, yes, he's had a couple of drops so far, but so is everybody in this offense. Why would you want to give that away? And it's the track record of draft picks, and I know this is Dan Morgan's first year. We'll have to see how it works out, but over the last 5 years, our draft picks have not been super good. So I am not for trading away proven talent for a draft pick, especially when it's going to end up being like a 4th rounder or something like that. That's just my take. Extend Diontae Johnson now. We like took a chance on him. We were willing to trade for him. Maybe that's something that he sees and it's like, oh, this team wants me here. Extend him now. Like, or worst comes to worst, tag him. I know the tag is big for receivers, but I want multiple functional receivers in my offense. If Leggett can turn into that, great, awesome. But I would like more than one, especially for if Bryce Young takes this time to develop and comes back, a young quarterback. If we end up drafting somebody who ends up needing to play next year, a young quarterback, I would like multiple functional receivers, not just Mingo and Leggett moving forward, and Jalen Coker next year or something moving forward.
Yeah, no, if we were to trade Diontae Johnson, almost like forces the hand that with our top 10 pick, we almost have to go wide receiver again.
Again.
Yeah. Like that's where it's like we have so many holes on the defensive side that the continually having to invest high draft capital into the offense just seems redundant and kind of ridiculous. So I'm not a big fan of that. Obviously, both of us are in favor of signing Diontae Johnson. When he was with the Steelers, he had a 3-year deal. A lot of these wide receivers that were getting extended to bigger contracts were signing like 4 or 5-year extensions. And so something that we might be able to do if he doesn't have interest like long-term being tied to the team, to sign that 2-year deal. Maybe we sign him $55 million a year for 2 years, puts him at about 27.5, definitely towards the top end of the market. But when you're one of the worst teams, you have to incentivize guys like Robert Hunt, in this case, Diontae Johnson, to come play with you, to be a part of your franchise, to be a leader in the locker room. So I definitely think.
And to that point, especially when you can't draft and develop, you have to do that as
well. And that's it. Just let this kind of process play out. See if you can build the defensive side in the next year or two, and make sure you have that wide receiver one. Like that is so critical in today's offense. Yes, just as much as the secondary and tertiary options can become viable if they take away that number one guy. But you have to have that number one guy for defenses to want to bracket off Diontae Johnson and put 2 guys on him so that you have other openings on the field. So again, doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't know how much credibility Adam Schefter's report has, who his sources are, if he's in contact with the agents. But yes, I think that's a great point to touch on. And it's a good segue into just the around the NFL as a whole. And we're 4 weeks in, about a quarter away through the season. And we're going to kind of combine the around the NFL talk with coach talk and talk about the 8 new coaching staffs for this year. One of them is kind of like a little bit of a cheat as we look at the Las Vegas Raiders, who just hired their interim head coach from last year in Antonio Pierce. But all the other teams, new head coaches, new offense and defensive play callers, outside of the Panthers, who retain Evero. But that kind of synergy and seeing how well these coaching staffs have kind of taken to the NFL and adapted with the rosters they've had to work with.
For sure. Back when we were in elementary school, every 9 weeks was your report card. And then halfway in between those, you'd have a progress report. And that's kind of what we're looking at here. We're a quarter of the way through the season. Bill Belichick used to say it takes about 3 to 4 weeks to find out who you are as a team. We should know by now who all of the teams are, especially these new regimes, these 8 teams or 7 if you don't really want to throw in the Raiders. But we should know who these teams are by now. And with that, I think we can give them kind of a letter grade about how we view them so far relative to their expectations coming into the year. So going alphabetically, that starts us with the division rival Atlanta Falcons, who are 2-2. They could really be 3-1-4. No, they've had some close games there, but they've also had some close close wins too, like this past week versus the Saints. A lot of fluky stuff in that game. It could have gone the Saints' way as well. So close games, 2-2. I think it's a bit of a letdown to start the season. Like we talked about, I think they had the expectation to come in to this division and really take the reins and take the lead of the division, if you will. I've seen a lot of discourse on Twitter recently about how the use of the skill position players, particularly Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts, has not necessarily improved from Arthur Smith, who seemed to know everything. And if you look at Arthur Smith now, the Pittsburgh Steelers offense doing just fine, I think. So how do you view the Falcons so far relative to what they were supposed to be coming in?
Well, we talked about what they were supposed to be coming into this. I bought their season under, and it was an alternative under for their wins, and I think it was around 7.5. So I thought this was about a 7-win team, and part of that was Kirk Cousins is coming off a major injury. He's with a new coaching staff on a new team, and through 3 weeks, I don't have the data yet for 4 weeks. We'll have it in the next day or two, but from an interception-worthy throw percentage from the quarterback, the only two quarterbacks who threw more interception-worthy passes on a rate basis were Patrick Mahomes and Anthony Richardson. And Patrick Mahomes, obviously, slow start to the year. That's been evident when you watch the games. Team's 4-0. They find a way to win. They're back-to-back Super Bowl champions. You can give Mahomes a little bit of grace. When you're looking at how inept the Falcons have appeared at times. The Steelers game, yes, there were opportunities and chances for them to win that game. They had to come back in that Philadelphia Eagles game. They almost came back against the Chiefs in week 3. And then when you look at the Saints, if it wasn't for a special teams and I believe a defensive touchdown, it was 2 fluky scores, they were outplayed and outclassed by the Saints. The Falcons do not have a lot of answers on offense right now. And one of that is Kyle Pitts, you used the number 4 overall pick in the draft a couple years ago for this guy, taking him over guys like Jamar Chase, Penny Sewell, impact players that probably would have an opportunity to change the outcome in a game now. And it just shows kind of the value of position football. And I know there have been different GMs that have made comments about that, but that's where I go back to the Falcons is this isn't a team that I think is equipped to win the NFC South when you see the Saints and the Buccaneers in the same division. So personally for me, they're meeting exactly where I think they are. I think honestly, they should probably be 1-3 rather than 3-1 or 4-0. I know those opportunities have been there, but this isn't a team that's capable of capitalizing on them.
You know, the guys who went directly after Kyle Pitts in order, it was Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, Penei Sewell, J.C. Horn, Pat Surtain, Devontae Smith. Then you can throw in Justin Fields, who's an effective starter right now.
Devontae Smith, yeah.
No, it was Fields
Devontae
then
Parsons. Oh, yeah, Fields.
Yeah. Who's an effective starter now. And then Micah Parsons. I don't remember. Rashawn Slater was 13th after that. So a bunch of really good players. Who knows? We talked about that draft class being stacked at the top, and now questions about Lawrence, Zach Wilson, nope. Trey Lance, nope. Kyle Pitts, nope. Maybe the top 4 or 5 or 4, not 5. Jamar Chase is really good. Maybe those top 4 weren't there. But for me, I can't agree more with you. I actually had higher expectations for him. They aren't meeting him so far. They're going to have to turn this around. Maybe Kirk Cousins is going to be more mobile throughout the season. Like maybe there's some still lingering effects coming off of his surgery, rehab, what have you. But it's not looking great. I wrote, I think C-, and you agreed with me there. So, C is average.
They rank 21st in EPA per play on offense. Like
maybe they should be closer to a D grade. It's we might have to change that one. But moving on to the Carolina Panthers, we've talked at length about them. We don't need to get too far into them. For me, it's a tale of 2 halves in the short season we played so far. The Bryce Young half was just ineffective play. Ineffectual on both sides of the ball. We can't exonerate the defense by any means, but just horrible play. And then once we install competent QB in there, it proves that the offense can work, which was a big step for Dave Canales. I almost said Dave Tepper there. I guess it's a big step for him too, but the defense still isn't good enough to contend with teams. And I think as the head coach and retaining Ejiro Evero, you brought up that was a big point. He was the only coordinator retained out of all the brand new coaching staffs. I think that they have to take a larger step there on defense. So for me, I think it's B- because I'm throwing the first 2 games out. I'm moving forward as if this is Andy Dalton or like a replacement level guy like that running the offense going forward, and a 1-1 start there for me is good enough for me to put it like B-, C-ish like that. I think we're similar in that vein, but I'll let you talk about the Panthers.
To associate anything with a B letter grade for this Panthers coaching staff, I think is a disservice to I think really what was expected of this, the whole hype in the offseason was Dave Canales was part of the ship that helped turn Geno Smith's career around, helped turn Baker Mayfield's career around. And the goal was he was going to help turn around Bryce Young's career. And that was the reason why, and I've brought this up now multiple times since we've had Mike Kay on, but that was why you hired Dan Morgan. It was an internal guy that believed in the investment you had made. And to just throw that out the window 2 weeks in, yes, is it great to see that the offensive system works? That's fantastic. But now you're dealing with a sunk cost that is going to set you back a couple years, that is going to require you to go find that franchise guy. And again, we've played some weaker defenses over the past couple of weeks. So I want to see moving forward if this offensive production keeps up. Are we on pace to be an above average, maybe even top 10 offense? Absolutely. But that's got to continue. We got to continue seeing that production, see Brooks and Chuba be effective 1-2 back like we saw Diontae Foreman and Chuba be a couple years ago for us. Those are the kind of signals I want to see throughout the year. And until then, I think it's at a C plus at best. Yes, does there appear to be a culture, an identity? Are the players rallying around them? Absolutely. Can you rebuild a roster in a couple off seasons? You definitely can. It's just a matter of, can you now find the quarterback that's going to lead you to the playoffs, maybe make a Super Bowl run, because that's what it's all about. And right now, that infrastructure is not in the building.
I like everything you're saying there. I think that is going to lean more on the front office decisions rather than the coaching staff. Remember, these are coaching grades, I think, is the exercise we're doing here, because it is part of coach talk.
Well, Evero has the lowest pressure rate in the NFL. And Evero,
but you also got to look at the personnel.
You can look at the personnel.
They trade away the only good pressure getter. You know what I mean?
I mean, you didn't retain Frankie Louvu. You traded Brian Burns, two guys that were effective in the pass rush last year and the year before.
Two leading pressure getters last year as well.
Absolutely. And so when you lose that and you try to fill it in with some of these stopgap guys, Davian Clowney has looked great at times, but DJ Wanham, he's been on IR.
Him yet.
Yeah. Yep. And then I think Clayvon Chason was cut before the season even started. So it's one of those things that guys that you were trying to fill in from a production side haven't panned out necessarily. And so I think when you look at that and you see that Evero hasn't necessarily been able to stop everything, we've been gashed in the passing game all 4 weeks. This isn't like, oh, we're getting gashed in the run game because we don't have anybody on the defensive line. All three levels, everybody has been at fault for some reason or another at every single point in these games.
Yeah, I think maybe at week 8 or 9, we'll do like a halftime report segment on a lot of these teams. We'll have to see if the teams adjust then. The next team alphabetically is actually the Las Vegas Raiders. We talked about them. A lot of their hires are internal. One of their hires that wasn't internal was the GM, Tom Telesco from the Chargers, who, again, not sure how he convinced him there, but he's there now. The Raiders are 2-2. I think they have a couple of impressive wins that come from behind win versus Baltimore, and then staying out in front of the Cleveland Browns this past week are good. Then they also have some bad losses. They should have beaten the Chargers week 1. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But I'll give them a week 1 tax there, and that was Antonio Pierce's first game as a bona fide head coach. And then they just got blown to smithereens by the Panthers. But again, maybe there's not a ton of tape on Andy Dalton, so you could kind of forgive that one there. The defense, I think, is largely fine, but they've been dealing with injuries. Max Crosby is hurt now. He missed his first ever game this past week throughout his entire NFL career. Tyree Wilson has been dealing with some stuff. Their first-round draft pick from a year ago. Malcolm Kuntz, who was their second best edge rusher last year, hasn't played a ton this season. So all of that stuff combined with Christian Wilkins not having the guys he needs on the outside, the defense hasn't performed, I guess, up to par. Maybe what I thought they could have been. I thought they could have been a top 10 to 12 unit. Haven't seen that so far. My big question for them is, what are they going to do on the offensive side of the ball? Devontae Adams is missing games now, and Gardner Minshew, to me, has not shown flashes of being an effective starter in the NFL without a guy like Shane Steichen calling the plays for him. So what do they do at QB is my question for the rest of this year and moving forward. Are they going to go all in for like trading up to the number 1 pick and taking like a Carson Beck, Jalen Milroe, Cam Ward next year? Maybe I know that they could have been a Dak team, but Dak's signed now. What are they going to do at QB? Or are they just going to get another stopgap next year? That's what this year is gearing toward for me. What about you?
I think it depends on what they do with Davante Adams before the trade deadline. I think he's getting older already, but if they end up trading him, I think it signals the fact that they're maybe leaning out the roster a little bit, prepping for a rebuild. And with a top 10 pick, you're probably going to have your choice of one of the three guys you just mentioned in the draft. Maybe you just sit tight. If the right quarterback falls in your lap, you take them. Otherwise, you keep kind of rebuilding this team. I think there are some interesting pieces. We saw flashes against the Browns defense, which is loaded from a talent standpoint. They've underwhelmed, honestly, to start the year. But when you're able to still move the ball with a guy like Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker, I think it shows that the infrastructure with them kind of rebuilding the offensive line, adding in tight ends and getting bigger with Michael Mayer and now Brock Bowers, that they have a foundation to build on with both sides. It's just a matter of continuing to build that identity and finding that franchise quarterback. So I don't think they should sell their soul to move up to number one, but I do think that if they feel like they are going to approach this as a rebuild, that you ship out Davante Adams, get what you can with some wide receiver needy teams across the league, and see if you can net a second, third round pick like we saw the Bills do with Stephon Diggs, the Falcons do with Julio Jones a couple of years ago, sending him to the Titans. Those kind of situations where you can actually net some resources to help with this rebuild.
Yeah, we just talked about the Chiefs, right? Needing a receiver. I don't know if they would do like an in-division trade like that. Maybe we'll see. Maybe if the Chiefs sweeten the deal, throw in a first or something. Who knows? Their division, we'll say rivals, division cohorts, the Los Angeles Chargers, are also 2-2. I forgot to mention, we wrote down B- for the Raiders. I think that's fair given what their roster is at this point.
I mean, impressive wins. Like you beat the Baltimore Ravens, like you said. You pull off the win against the Browns, and not having film on Andy Dalton, the week one shenanigans. This appears to be a team where they win the games they shouldn't, and they're losing the games that they should win.
Right, and for that Browns game, they got out in front and stayed there. The Browns were playing catch up that game. The Chargers also 2-2. They start 2-0. They ended up beating the Raiders week one. They come into Carolina and beat us as well, send Bryce Young to the bench. But then after that, they've gone 0-2. They lose to the Pittsburgh Steelers and now to the Kansas City Chiefs, who I should say are quite hapless on offense in terms of a group of weapons. You know, they're down to Kareem Hunt, who they just signed off the street, rejuvenated Travis Kelce, I'll say, and Xavier Worthy. 2-2 start rather, excuse me. A ton of injuries, I think, on their, especially on offense. Both of their tackles missed the Steelers game. I believe one of their receivers also missed this past Chiefs game. And we saw Herbert on the bench taking his helmet and slamming it into the bench after this game. Don't think I've ever seen Justin Herbert that mad. But after the good start, is it starting to fall apart a little bit? Are the injuries catching up to him? What's going on with him?
I don't know. I will say that Greg Roman comes in, and at least what we saw with Kellen Moore and Joe Lombardi before that was this offense. Now, granted, they had Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, a few pieces that are no longer on the team, but they were a above average offense, maybe even borderline top 10 when those guys were on the field. And right now they're below 20th in EPA per play in both the run and the pass. And so Greg Roman isn't able to install an efficient run game, which is shocking to me. You invest so much in your offensive line, and we're seeing what the Panthers are able to do behind our reinforced offensive line. I'm kind of shocked we aren't seeing that on the offensive side. Now, on the defensive side, they did retain both Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, and the defense is performing well. Jesse Minter has those guys playing well. I think he kind of comes from a similar philosophy as Mike McDonald, and from the play caller ranking model that I set up each week, he ranks first the past 2 weeks. We'll see where he kind of falls this week, but holding the Chiefs to 17 points, regardless of all the injuries they faced, is impressive. The whole team's under that 20-point threshold, gives your offense an opportunity to go win it. They just got to find their identity there. And I think that's part of the frustration we're seeing with Herbert is there aren't answers. He's having to force a lot of things to Quentin Johnson, a second-year receiver who struggled last year. Ladd McConkey, who is shown some flashes, but he's, again, I wouldn't say he's at the point in his career where he can be that number one guy. Maybe in a couple of years, he can take on more of a Cooper Kupp role and be a solid contributor. But to be that number one, they just don't have that guy. And it will be very interesting to see if the Malik Neighbors, Joe Alt debate kind of heats up, if there's still a lack of production in the coming weeks.
Yeah, it's the old Jamar Chase versus Penei Sewell, right? Jamar Chase got him to the Super Bowl, but what happened in the Super Bowl? Joe Burrow got crushed. So we'll have to end up seeing there. B- for them as well. I thought Jim Harbaugh's gotten up to a good start. They know what they wanted to do, especially the first couple of weeks with running the ball, but it's kind of tailed off since then. Maybe when they get their tackles back, they can get back to that run game. We'll have to see. New England Patriots, they are tied for the worst record out of this entire group so far with us and the Titans. 1-3 so far. They got to win week 1 against the Bengals. That was kind of a big talking point was, oh my God, the Bengals they're falling to the Patriots. It was in Cincinnati. They had their triple orange get up on and what have you. But after that, they've lost 3 straight. I don't think there's a ton of expectations for this team. We talk about a talent deficient roster with us. I think the Patriots are even worse from a talent standpoint. So I think getting a win week 1 is nice. And I think the big question is, are they doing the right thing with Drake May? Sitting him through at least through the first 4 weeks, maybe the rest of the year. Who knows? But we see how bad this team is. Jacoby Brissett's already been battered a little bit. Thinking back to that night game that they had where they had to throw Drake May in there. So when are we going to see Drake May? Should they sit him the rest of the year? What's that going to be like? But I think with the injuries on defense and shipping people out and just an overall devoid talent roster, we shouldn't feel too bad about them being 1-3, even though a team that just let go of Belichick and all the years of Belichick and Brady probably has high expectations. Let's rein it in a bit and be happy that they got that 1 win week 1.
Yeah, I mean, they play the Dolphins this coming week, and honestly,
that could be another win.
I mean, with the quarterback situation currently in Miami, they haven't traded for a quarterback yet. It's one of those things that I really do think that's a win on their schedule. And if they can rack up 4, maybe even 5 wins, that's a successful season. I think they're still picking like the top 5, definitely the top 10 this year. And they are a roster devoid of talent. I mean, this is a team that lost Christian Barmore, who they extended, traded Matt Judon right before the season started. That's a good portion of your defensive line. However, I will say they have been evaluating defensive linemen very well in the draft recently. They drafted Keon White a little bit ago, and Christian Gonzalez, who had an injury last year in his rookie year, looks just fine coming off that injury this year. And so when you have some of these cornerstones, you did lock up some people on the linebacker and secondary levels. I think that's going to help the Patriots on defense moving forward. It is really about, I think, next offseason, getting an elite wide receiver 1, getting an offensive line and piecing together, grabbing a couple more starters. We talked about Omar Khan and the Steelers, and they're obviously dealing with a lot of injuries on their offensive line, but his approach of just, we're going to keep bolstering this until we get a competent offensive line on the field. And I think that's a great approach. I think the Patriots are trying to protect Drake May from bad mental mistakes. And I don't think he would have necessarily found a lot of success playing the 49ers. Now, in the coming weeks, if Brissett gets hurt, I think him getting the starting job makes a lot of sense. I think if their bye week wasn't, I believe it's like week 13 or 14. I think it was about halfway. One. Yeah. If they had it halfway through the season, I would say after that bye week would be a perfect time to let the rookie cut it loose, because at that point you've seen the tape, you've seen the speed of things, you understand how the offense is supposed to work, and you can go from there rather than just jumping in and still piecing things together. So I think that's going to help Drake May. I think he should start at some point this year. It's just, I think, going to be dependent on how bad they look if Jacoby Brissett gets hurt, and if they feel like May is ready. And I think May is ready. I think he would definitely be better than Caleb Williams has shown out through 4 weeks, with as much talent as Williams has had through 4 weeks. So one of those things that, yes, bad offensive line, but I think he's got to get reps sooner rather than later.
I'm with you there. We wrote down C+ for them. I think that's fair. They're kind of the inverse of the Panthers, right? They have some good defensive infrastructure, but no receivers, no O-line. It's kind of an interesting flip-flop there. Seattle Seahawks, who had a chance to be undefeated coming into this episode, they lost one last night to the Detroit Lions. Goff had a perfect game completion percentage wise. The Lions were just doing whatever they wanted on offense and rallied off, I believe it was 6 touchdowns, right? 42 points, just took over there. But the Seattle Seahawks overall through the first quarter of this season, I think they're doing better than I certainly expected. They might be falling below your expectations because you were quite high on the Seahawks this year. But I think the defense is coming along quite nicely under Mike McDonald so far. Really, really good defensive line play. And I like what Grubb's been able to do, unlocking all areas of the field with Geno Smith. And I like how he's getting everybody involved, not just DK, not just Lockett, but Jackson Smith and Jigba is doing a ton for them as well. I'm quite excited about the Seahawks. I wrote down A. I think you might have changed it to A-. Maybe I wrote A-. I can't quite remember like when that minus was added, but they've certainly been a good team so far this season. And outside of maybe one team who we'll talk about in a few minutes, they've been the best of all the new regimes so far.
Yeah, absolutely. They went in. I think the Seahawks, the identity-wise on offense, you knew what you had. And so bringing in Ryan Grubb, trying to get a more aerial attack going, especially with Geno Smith's skill set, I think was a smart idea. They invested in a good backup that could, I think, play a similar role of hitting those deeper shots in Sam Howell. So really good infrastructure from that side. But I think when you go on the defensive side, they would have had a lot more success against Detroit if you aren't missing your first-round pick in Byron Murphy, Boye Mafe, who's come into like his own over the past year or so. Uchenna Nwosu, I believe, was out. I'm not sure if Leonard Williams was out or in, but when you have so many of these defensive line starters out, it allowed the Lions to kind of do whatever they wanted to because it forced McDonald to put more guys in the boxes and watch some of these gap control runs and be able to still cover on the back end. And at some point, there's going to be a hole in the defense. And Jared Goff was able to find that. He went 18 for 18 last night, hit Jameson Williams for a massive touchdown in the second half that really kind of put them out in front for good. And I'm really excited to see what the Seahawks look like once they do get healthy. I think a good litmus test will be in the next 2 weeks. The 49ers play the Cardinals at home, but then I think they go to Seattle the week after. And I think that game, if the Seahawks are healthy, that will really indicate where is this team right now. And I think the Seahawks are ready for that battle. I think they showed that they could get in a shootout with a tough NFC rival that they're going to potentially play in the playoffs. So to me, all green lights here. I think they are really building something special, and I think they can be a contender if they get healthy.
For sure. And losing to the Lions is not like a super bad thing. You know, I think the Lions are really, really strong on offense. So I think they played a good game regardless. Another team that played last night and had the actual opposite result, opposite record as well, the Tennessee Titans, 1-3, would have been 0-4, I think, if Tua Tagovailoa would have played in this game. But that remains to be seen, I suppose. 1-3, we wrote down a C grade so far. That defense has been very, very good, I think. For the Titans, it's just like, what are we going to do with Will Levis? You know, he has 2 or 4 of these crazy bad moments, memeable moments, as you talked about last week. And they actually got a win when he came out of the game and Mason Rudolph ended up finishing the game for them. Now, they probably still would have won with Will Levis, just depending or looking at how putrid that Dolphins offense is. But what are we going to do with Levis going forward? Because he was a second-round pick. He was picked 32, but you got to remember 31 picks in that first round last year, 2 years ago, rather. What are we going to do with Will Levis? Because I think Callahan knows what he's doing, but can he get enough out of the team if Levis is the starter?
Levis is definitely making plays. I think there's an element of it, and there was, I believe it was a 4th down play a couple of weeks ago. It might have been against the Jets, but he shoots this 56-yard ball downfield. Beautifully placed ball by Levis and just showcase kind of his arm talent, which is really special in this league. The issue is he had a guy underneath there for the first down. And sometimes you have to play situational football. The next team that we're going to talk about, their quarterback has been phenomenal at situational football. Sometimes it's not about making the spectacular play. It's making the play in front of you that has a high probability of hitting. Because even if you throw a beautiful ball 50, 60 yards down the field, as a wide receiver going at full speed with a defender or two around you, a lot can happen. It is hard to track a ball, catch it, make sure the defender doesn't impede it. Like, it is a skill in and of itself to go track those kind of passes rather than just taking some of the easy layups that can be installed in an offense that Callahan has had for Will Levis. And so just playing smart, sound, fundamental football in key situations is what Will Levis is going to have to learn to do. And if he doesn't, they're going to have to turn to a guy that I think has less arm talent, but also less of an inclination to make some of these boneheaded mistakes, just so that their defense can help them keep them in games. Because Tavondre Sweat right now looks like the real deal. And obviously the Dolphins' interior offensive line isn't anything special to write home about. But when you have him and Jeffrey Simmons, that is just, you can't get anything going on the inside, and they're going to get after the quarterback. And that is just a great duo to have. That was something that I thought Vita Vea and Kalijah Kancey could be last year. But it turns out I think the Tennessee Titans are probably, if we're looking at just starting interior defensive linemen, one of the better tandems in the entire league.
For sure. You talk about kind of the young QBs of that draft class. Bryce Young struggling, Richardson struggling, Levis struggling. It's kind of tough to see that, but hopefully they can get it turned around. The last team, and you alluded to them, the Washington Commanders, the 3-1 Washington Commanders. Shout out Colin Dunphy. A+ is what I put down, and you didn't change it, so we must be in agreement here. They've been phenomenal, particularly on offense. Their offensive output is insane. You look at this graph that you put up here, Steven. Look who's at the top. And I know this is just young QBs and stuff like that, but if this were a graph of all the offenses in the NFL, Washington would still be at the top because they lead the NFL in EPA per play. Jaden Daniels clearly has it, like he has the it factor, whatever you need to call it. And he's the gout, like he is pushing that offense, making the right plays like you talked about, moving, like scrambling. We know he has the talent with his legs. He won the Heisman after all, but he's also throwing on the move as well. Something he didn't do a ton at LSU last year. He's been phenomenal so far. It's kind of funny that 2 years in a row, the number 2 overall pick is like grossly outperforming the number 1 overall pick QB. So that kind of stings there a little bit, but it's nice to see Jaden Daniels really, really playing well. I've been a fan of his way back since when he was playing for Arizona State. When Brandon Ayuk was getting drafted, I remember watching the combine. I was a sophomore in college at that point. I remember seeing Jaden Daniels bombing it to him. I'm like, oh, that guy's going to be really, really good. And wouldn't you know it, he's really, really good.
What's funny is that he was quarterback 3 for both of us. Mm-hmm. I thought quarterback 1 and 2 were between Drake May and Caleb
We haven't seen Drake May yet, so that's a caveat, you know.
Yeah, and it is. He could end up being the superstar out of this draft class. I think a lot of people are getting really hype about like Andrew Luck and RG3, and they both have relatively short careers. So who's to say that Drake May isn't going to be the star of this draft class? But 4 weeks in, the overreactions are kind of setting in. I saw this crazy stat from Robbie Greer, a guy that's been able to keep 538's quarterback ELO up from the public standpoint, which is great. And he pointed out that Jaden Daniels is really one more game away from surpassing the total EPA that CJ Stroud had entirely all of last year. Not the first 5 weeks of last year, all of last year that CJ Stroud had.
And this was a top 5 rookie QB season, right?
Yep. And so when you turn on the tape and you're seeing what Jaden Daniels is doing, it is so special because it is exactly what I was talking about, like the juxtaposition of what Will Levis is, where, yes, he can make some of those big plays. I mean, the darts he was throwing downfield against the Bengals were absolutely insane. And Scary Terry is a phenomenal wide receiver in and of its own right. But when you look at the rest of this offense and the supporting cast, Olamide Zaccheaus, like, I mean, this guy's been a journeyman being on the Falcons and the Eagles. He hasn't been a big contributor. He's a contributor in this offense. Mm-hmm. Zach Ertz and some of these other playmakers, and just watching Jaden Daniels play situational football, not hold on to the ball long, getting to the top of his hitch, and then boom, the ball's out. I mean, that just kind of processing, trust in the offense, to see that Cliff Kingsbury, because there was a lot of indication, I thought, early on in the offseason, especially the preseason, that he would kind of just run a similar offense that he did in Arizona. No, he's running 12 personnel. He's using play action, pistol. He's allowing the quarterback to be as special an athlete as he is, but still process in a way to where you find the open guy, where you're just taking the positive yards. And I think the coolest stat to take away from Jaden Daniels is you go back from week 2 with the Giants to about halftime against the Cardinals in week 4. He didn't punt a single time. Like, Peyton Manning and Tom Brady weren't doing that. And so there is an element of, yes, Cliff Kingsbury is putting in an offense that obviously works for Jaden Daniels, but he is still operating it, and he's operating at an extremely high level. And so I'm very curious to see if there's going to be any defense moving forward that can at least slow him down a little bit, because this guy has been on a tear since day one.
Well, you heard it here first. Steve says Jaden Daniels is better than Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, whoever
exact
you want
words,
to say.
Verbatim.
Yeah, clip it if you want. But no, he's been phenomenal so far. And when we talked about this division, we did our NFC East breakdown. We said, or I particularly said, I want to put them higher than the Giants, but I'm so scared of that offensive line. Look what he's doing in spite of this offensive line. It's just been phenomenal.
Sam Howell wasn't doing this last year. Granted, different offense, but Sam Howell wasn't doing this.
But he was taking 68 sacks or whatever it was over the course of 14 games. 16 games.
Jacoby Brissett wasn't running near Jacoby Brissett looked average in this offense, but again, this is uncanny production from a team and a roster devoid of talent, and it's remarkable.
This is like all-time rookie production. Like, I'd be curious by the end of the year to see, looking EPA, success rate, whatever you want to look at, is he number one all time for rookie QBs? Because that's the kind of stuff we're approaching.
He's on that trajectory. I mean, like, if CJ Stroud was a top 5 year, he's probably like getting to that stratosphere, and we're not even at the halfway point.
For sure. The only thing I want to talk about is Dan Quinn comes in. They sign a ton of guys on defense, right? When we looked at the Houston Texans before they got Stroud, what they would do in the offseason is they would sign it seemed like 10 to 15 guys just on the defensive side alone that were middle of the pack NFL starters that could keep that defense going. Well, that's what the Washington Commanders did, right? Now, I'm a big Frankie Louvu fan, but I'm not going to call him a top 10
borderline
linebacker.
Pro Bowl. He's borderline Pro Bowl caliber.
Yeah, and then Jeremy Chin they signed as well. They signed the 2 Cowboys backups as well, Dante Fowler, Dorrance Armstrong. They're bringing in reinforcements, guys who can play in the NFL on the defensive side of the ball. And because Dan Quinn was such a phenomenal defensive coordinator in Dallas, I think he'll be able to get good enough production out of them that we might be talking about the playoffs with this Washington team here, maybe in like 6 or 8 weeks, something like that. And before the season, you would call us crazy, right, if we talked about the playoffs for this team. But really, really good to see with this team. And they're the only A+ we gave out of everybody. The only other A we gave was the Seahawks, and just really, really good to see for them. They certainly found their guy of the future, right? And as through 4 weeks, we kind of know what the Panthers are, functional offense, but we need defense, right? So I think it's time to finally implement that future Panthers segment where we look at the players in college right now, how they performed over the weekend. And it's time to address this, frankly, ridiculous, setup that I'm wearing right now.
This hat, man, the shades.
We're 58 minutes into the episode, 58 and a half, and I've got the Bama hat on, the shades on. I'm drinking the White Claw beer of the week here. It's Black Cherry White Claw because that's what I drink during Alabama games. I have a little ritual that I do, and wouldn't you know it, Alabama, the underdog at home, first time since 2007, allowed Georgia into their stadium, and they cooked them in the first half. Georgia came back in the second half, and then Alabama put it away, courtesy of this guy. He is 17 years old. I didn't know if you knew that. We got the clip right here. Look, just the body control here of Ryan Williams, a little double pirouette, just accelerates past these top 50 picks that Georgia's going to produce. And I just wanted to put that out there and just talk about how Alabama just did what they needed to do. Kirby Smart is now 1-6 versus Alabama. Doesn't matter if Saban or Coach Kellen DeBoer is the coach. I think the interesting thing from the Alabama perspective, and I promise I won't talk too long about him, Kalen DeBoer, the new head coach. As we all know, Coach Nick Saban retires, the greatest college football coach of all time. You could argue greatest football head coach. I'll leave that up in the air. But Kalen DeBoer, the guy from the University of Washington who's coming in to replace him, you look at the marquee coaches he's gone against. Lincoln Riley, who's the head coach of USC now. Steve Sarkisian, the head coach of Texas, who's looking really, really good right now. Texas they're ranked number 2 because Bama jumped up to 1. I think rightfully so. You beat the number 2 team. You got to jump up there. But Texas is on a roll right now. Dan Lanning, the head coach of Oregon, I believe they are number 6 right now. And Kirby Smart, the head coach of Georgia. Coach Kalen DeBoer is 8-0 against all of those guys. So it's going to be interesting to see how if there's going to be fall off, because Coach Saban is Coach Saban, but how that's going to fall off to Coach DeBoer, especially in the new 12-team playoff this year. As the season progresses, the college football season, I'd love for us to talk more about the playoff and its implications and stuff, because I think it's going to be really, really interesting. But as for now, we should kind of bring it back to the Panthers, right? Because this is a Panthers podcast. And over the course of the past since that Bama game, really, because that was the galvanization. It ended the college football night, and it really kicked off a discussion. Every year we talk about, there's not 32 first-round grades, right? And I think that's true for a lot of evaluators.
The people that argue for the 32 just blow my mind. But yes, continue.
There are 32 first-round picks. That doesn't believe that when I look at every draft class, there's going to be 32 people that I'm like, I would take him in the first round every year. That's just not going to work. That math doesn't work that way, right? And I've listed here because for the past 3 years, I've done my own evaluation. In 2022, I had 11 guys that I thought were for sure first-round picks. And that was topped off by Kyle Hamilton, the Ravens safety, Aiden Hutchinson, the Detroit Lions edge rusher, and Evan Neal, the Giants tackle. He's not good. Bust, all right? I'll admit that one. 2023, I said 15 people were for sure first-rounders. Will Anderson Jr., Defensive Rookie of the Year, nailed it. Jalen Carter, really good, nailed it. Bijan Robinson, thought he got held back, but I think he's still a really good player there. Last year in 2024, I said there were 18 people that I would take in the first round in most years, and I think that's fair. Marvin Harrison Jr., phenomenal start to his career. Brock Bowers, really, really good start. And Joe Walt, who's been injured, but when he was playing was week 1. You remember what his stats were against Max Crosby? It was this many pressures allowed. Zero pressures on, I think it was 16 pass rushing snaps. Insane stuff. This year, and I know it's kind of early, but preliminarily, I'm at like maybe 10 or 11 guys that I think could be first-round picks, and I haven't even gotten close to settling on a number 1, number 2, or even number 3 kind of guy, and that's kind of concerning for the Panthers because we have clear needs, right? I've written down here the 10 or 11 guys that I think could be first-round picks, and the majority of them would fit Panthers' needs. Edge rusher Nick Scourton, Texas A&M. We need edge rushers, right? Defensive lineman Mason Graham, Michigan. Deion Walker from Kentucky. Real monster there. Corner. I do think we still need a corner. Will Johnson, Michigan. Benjamin Morrison, Notre Dame. And Travis Hunter. We all know how electric he has been. You can list him as a receiver as well because I think we need a receiver as well. Luther Burden at receiver as well. Ted McMillan. It's Tedoroya McMillan. From Arizona as well. Then you have guys like Kelvin Banks. He's a tackle for Texas. Maybe we could use a tackle. If Icky continues his trajectory, maybe. I don't know if I'd want to spend a top 10 pick on a tackle, though. Ashton Jeanty from Boise State. You've probably heard that name before because he's played in 4 games and has over 800 rushing yards and 13 touchdowns. And he got pulled at halftime versus Portland State. He already has 6 runs of 50-plus more yards this season, 4 games in. You know the last person who had 6 or more 50-plus yard runs in a season in college football?
I'm going to say it's like Reggie Bush or something.
Ooh, it's actually much more recent. It's actually one Chuba Hubbard in 2019 at Oklahoma State. He had a really, really good year that year. But Ashton Jeanty is doing this through 4 games. To me, and again, Bama hat here, I would love Jalen Milroe to win the Heisman. This guy is my Heisman leader so far, Ashton Jeanty. And then Tyler Booker, who's a guard for Alabama. 1, I don't know if you want to take a guard, top 10. Number 2, we don't need a guard. Our guards are really good. But suffice, like the point of all of this is, to me, it is very up in the air who the early leaders for that top 5, top 10 group are. And it comes down to, if there's only this many good players, does it make sense to trade back? I'm a big trade back candidate because you want as many darts as you can throw at the board. But if there's only 10 good spots on the dart or 10 good darts or whatever, should you trade back or should we get one of these bona fide people that we think can come in and make a big difference to start the year? I'm talking about this from a Panthers perspective. If the list of for sure guys is low, are you team trade back or team stick and draft? Like, assuming we get like a pick 6th or something.
If we get pick 6, and I would say, and I want to funnel this in on, and I know cornerbacks, if you hit on a cornerback in the top 10, which usually your premier guys are going to be there, sometimes they outperform edge rushers. But that is a coin flip chance that you're taking. I think you would almost be better extending Diontae Johnson, extending J.C. Horn. Right now, Horn has stayed healthy. He looks like he's cleaned up whatever's going on with some of the soft tissue injuries. And as long as that maintains, I'm okay building the secondary the way we are with some journeymen, some hodgepodging pieces together. I think that'll work. But I think you have to approach the defense the same way you approach the offense, and that's build inside out. Like, we got to be able to stop the run and get after the quarterback without necessarily sending the house. And whether that's finding a defensive lineman, like a tackle, to pair with Derek Brown, or finding an edge rusher who can get some pressure off the edge, that I think needs to be the priority. Now, if some of those guys aren't there when you pick at pick 6, and somebody at pick like 13 wants to move up and get their guy, whether it's a quarterback, whether it is one of these premier first round grade prospects, I think if at that point, when you move back to 13, maybe some of the guys that you have like grade wise are all in the same category from like an edge rusher or defensive line standpoint. And at that point, you're able to get your guys still, feel comfortable about it, and then gain other draft capital to help you rebuild this team. That is what I would do if one of those top guys aren't there in the top 10.
Yeah, that's called, for the listeners, that's called like the horizontal draft board strategy, where you put it, you don't list it like 1 to 150 or whatever your board is. You have clusters, right?
Yep.
And in each cluster, you have a guy 1 to 15, 1 to 20, or even 1 to 5 at the top here. And if one of those guys isn't there, I'm team trade back. But for as bad as our defensive line is, I'm almost tempted to take one of these guys and just go with it, because I like the weak link system in the secondary. I like all that stuff. But this is a team with a lot of needs, so I can see the trade back part as well. We're already pushing over an hour, so let's speed through the Panthers game preview. It's another revenge game for Andy Dalton. We're at the Chicago Bears this time. It's going to be interesting, right? Because last week we played a very, very bad defense. You know what the Bears have? A really good defense. So we're going to need to be on our toes, and not like throwing on our toes like Bryce Young, but we need to like be aware of the defense and move the ball methodically against them. When you look at what their defense has allowed, only 7 touchdowns against them all year. But of those 7, 2 were passing and 5 were rushing. As far as pass defense goes, they're pretty good. Rush defense, middle of the pack. So Dave Canales, you have shown us, you told us before, we didn't believe you. You've shown us now that you're stubborn with running the ball. Keep showing us. That's where our gap is going to be in attacking this defense, because their secondary is like playing lights out right now, and their interior defensive line does not scare me in the slightest. That's their weak point. That's what we need to attack. And like jumping ahead just a little bit, my perfect take is if we're gonna score, we're gonna run for scores. And my take is we're gonna rush for 2 touchdowns against the Bears this week.
I like that take, and we'll highlight it again when we get to the perfect take segment. You're absolutely right. This is a better defense, but I think on the flip side, it's not as good of an offense as we saw Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Caleb Williams is still figuring things out. They have issues across the offensive line. And Shane Waldron, while it definitely, when you turn on the tape, there are definitely plays to be made by Caleb Williams with just inaccuracy or not making the right read, I feel like things could be simplified, made easier, where the offensive play caller is in the quarterback's ear to, I think, do what Cliff Kingsbury is doing with Jaden Daniels, and that's just take the play that's right in front of you. Like, don't overcomplicate this. Don't go be a hero. Take the play that's there, live the play another down. And so we've seen Caleb Williams start to come alive. They had a good game against the Rams last week. Our defense is just as bad, if not worse. I would say the Rams' defensive line is a lot better than ours, but our secondary obviously has more pieces. If the Bears can start churning out, running the ball like they were last week, I think it can be a long day for them on a plus side. But if Caleb Williams is making mistakes, Evero is able to disguise some coverages, there's a chance to put Andy Dalton in some advantageous situations, allow Chuba Hubbard to kind of control this game and just churn out yards after yards. So I'm excited to see kind of what we do. I think it's going to end up coming down to the fact that our defense isn't good. And if we aren't able to stop them at all, it's going to be a very, very long day. So we'll see. Again, much better defense. Definitely going to put a lot more stress on Andy Dalton and the supporting cast.
Yeah, and my last point versus the Bears would be, if we continue to play this kind of preventative style defense that Evero likes, I think that can be an advantage because as of through 4 weeks, the Bears actually have the least amount of explosive plays on offense, which is 10 or more yards rushing, 20 or more passing in the entire league. They only have 12 so far, 6 of each. For comparison, the Green Bay Packers have 38, over 12 on each rushing and passing. So definitely not an explosive team offensively. It's going to be Everett's going to do well to keep the things in front of us. And if Caleb Williams can nickel and dime, like you said, he hasn't shown that he has. That, I think, is the key to victory for the Panthers. But I am not super, super optimistic given how strong their defense is. I think Diontae Johnson is going to have a bit of a fit versus Jalen Johnson, the Bears standout corner. But
that's where you need Xavier Legette or Mingo to step up. It's time
exactly
for them to show out. And Legette, the show, it wasn't a fluke last week, that he can keep being the go-to guy for Andy Dalton.
For sure. We're getting into Purrfect Takes territory, and we like to rehash our takes from last week. Both of us hit some big X's this week. No Des Bryant, just didn't hit our picks. I said the Panthers would score 4. Andy Dalton would churn the way, lead us there. It should have been 4. But that first drive of the game, Diontae Johnson, fans are like, oh, quit calling these goal line fades. That was the correct call. Diontae Johnson just dropped it. And then there are 3 straight plays where Chuba and the offensive line couldn't get that push in there. Dave Canales said it himself that the team and both he and the team are mad that they didn't finish that drive. Regardless, we ended up with 3 touchdowns and a field goal. So I did not get my take last week.
Came up just short, and apparently I made the call on the wrong guy. After watching the Raiders shutting down Brock Bowers, Devontae Adams, I was like, hey, maybe we have a shot at controlling what Jamar Chase and T. Higgins do. T. Higgins went off, led the team in targets, receptions, what I thought Andrei Yoshevich would do. He seemed like a viable option literally the week prior against Washington as being kind of that go-to guy for Burrow. So just a little bit off on the predictions just because of what I saw of the Panthers defense against the Raiders and then what I had seen with the Bengals offense against the Commanders. So came up just short. Jacob, you said your perfect take was that the Panthers would score 2 or more touchdowns against the Bears on Sunday. Mine is that the Jaguars, they fall to 0-5 this week, and Doug Peterson will end up being the first head coach canned. And I know we talked a lot ad nauseum about a lot of the newer play callers. I was excited this year about the Jaguars. I thought they fixed a lot of the issues on defense with bringing in Ryan Nielsen, Eric Armstead, really finding identity there. But this offense is just not clicking. And you pay a quarterback $55 million, and you get to the point where you're at press conferences and you're saying, we as coaches are doing our jobs. It's up to the players to make plays. And that's just, it's not the right answer. Mike McDaniel last year and even the year before was very big on saying, it's my fault. Like if we're not set up properly, that's on me and not having guys prepared. And that to me is the kind of responsibility I would have liked to see from Doug Peterson. And just with that mindset, going up against Shane Steichen and the Indianapolis Colts. And I don't see it. I think they'll go in there with Joe Flacco. Maybe Anthony Richardson comes back, but I think there's enough juice on both sides for them to really just beat up on a demoralized team that couldn't pull out a win where they were leading for most of the game. So that's how I see Purrfect Takes shaping out for this coming week. You want to touch on bets before we hop off, or you think we've gone over a little bit?
Yes, but I have a real quick point I want to talk about with your take. I like your take. I'm inclined to agree with it. Right now, I have the Jags winning that game. I think I'm going to walk it back and pick the Colts just because you've convinced me there. But looking at the Jacksonville Jaguars, they have Trevor Lawrence, who had success in college, a great amount of success in college. He beat this team quite a few times in the national championship. The previous quarterback, actually 2 quarterbacks before, Kelly Bryant was the previous quarterback. Deshaun Watson, the previous Clemson quarterback, also found success against Alabama in college. Granted, he wasn't the first overall pick. I believe he was 11th or 12th. He went after Mahomes, who was 10th. Can you kind of compare, or what do you think is the comparison between Deshaun Watson's path in Houston, just his play on the field, and Trevor Lawrence's in Jacksonville? Because we saw Deshaun Watson, I think, do a lot more with a Houston team that I'm not sure has maybe as much overall talent as the Jacksonville Jaguars. Granted, they had DeAndre Hopkins for a while. J.J. Watt was there, I think, for 2 years when Watson was there. But I think the rest of the roster was quite limited compared to its stars, whereas the Jags roster, I think, is more well-rounded. How would you, I guess, expectation-wise, or how do you view Trevor Lawrence's start to his career versus Deshaun Watson's? I personally think Watson's is a bit more impressive considering what he had and the expectations for Lawrence, who was a generational prospect in the draft process.
I am blanking out on the play concept, but the Saints are utilizing this with Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed in some cases. They ran it against the Cowboys, but we used to see a lot of those similar play designs with Will Fuller and DeAndre Hopkins. So there were ability to create a bunch of spacing, easier plays for the quarterback, and to go back to the play calling in Jacksonville, I feel like they're asking Trevor Lawrence to make a lot of like big time throws over and over again. And there isn't just the simplicity of just hit this guy. Now, obviously you look at the interception against the Bills, Brian Thomas wide open. There are definitely miscues on Lawrence's part, but I think on a lot of cases, Lawrence is doing the right thing. It's very, very intricate and detailed and very hard. And when you look at other offenses with starting quarterbacks, like the Dolphins last year with Tua, and even I think some of the run to play or pass concepts that we see with the Bills under Joe Brady, even though they're simple, they're easy enough to just implement because you have the playmakers, you have the mismatch. Just use that to your advantage. Don't overcomplicate this. And that I think is hurting Trevor Lawrence. So I could definitely see him getting in a position because he's kind of floundered in Jacksonville over this few years of like a Carson Wentz situation where he gets traded. But I think if he lands with kind of feet down, head up, that you're in a situation with a Kevin O'Connell, maybe Sean McVay is looking for Matthew Stafford's replacement in a couple of years, where he goes to a conducive offensive structure where he is that guy and he can lead a team. And I think that's capable enough. And it's definitely there. Like you turn on the film, the playmaking is there. He's just got to play more situational football and not make some of the boneheaded mistakes that we've seen from another quarterback in the same division, Will Levis.
For sure. Wouldn't it be funny if Doug Peterson had Wentz and Lawrence, I guess, get him fired and then they moved to different teams? But you brought it up. I think it's a good time to get into bets before we leave. I like to talk about one that I liked or that I did well this past week, and that was Jalen Milroe first TD. I thought they would get out the gate, utilize his legs, and really crush Georgia's defense with it. And that's exactly what happened. He ran for the first one, threw for the second one. They ran a third one. Then he ran for another one. And then the one that we showed you, the Ryan Williams one, was late. The one that I like this upcoming week, Arizona's it's like a crazy spread against the Niners. And I know the Niners are at home. They should be the better
7.5?
It was
last I saw.
The one I saw was 7.5. Yes. I'm still a believer in Kyler, even though the first couple weeks haven't gone as we want them to. I wouldn't be surprised if the Cardinals go into San Francisco and not only cover, but they could pull off a close win there as well. So that would be one that I would hypothetically like in that situation. What about you?
I think that's a good pick. From last week on the season, I'm 10-6-1. I went 2-3 this past week, hit on the Titans. That was an easy mismatch. In my opinion, the Titans defense was good enough to carry them to a win, regardless of what was going on the offensive side. Saints. I should have won against the Falcons. Unfortunately, didn't. You picked the Falcons to win. I don't think you put any money on them, but that was a money line that unfortunately didn't hit. And I got to go back to the board on the Bills. I thought the Bills were starting to unlock some things on both sides of the ball. Unfortunately, played a lot of nickel against the Ravens to try to account for the speed and then got bullied in the run game. And so you're going to have to look back and figure out how to fix that so you can match up well. And on offense, they're going to have to find answers. I mean, they got down in a hole, and that was something that was very reminiscent of like Cam Newton and like that 2013, 2014 range of where if we got down early, it was very hard because we didn't have the playmakers to kind of get in a shootout or rally and get back in a game. We needed to kind of be in reach throughout the duration if we were going to kind of win the game against a tougher opponent. So that was kind of the vibes I'm getting from the Bills from the Sunday night football game. We'll see if that continues. They're still 3-1, one of the better teams in the AFC. Just something to kind of think about. Bets that I like, DraftKings underdogs right now. Tampa Bay, they're obviously on the road. Baltimore, they're on the road. Or actually, no, Baltimore's not underdog. But both those teams are on the road. I would take the money line or the spread on both of those. And then on FanDuel, New England is currently an underdog, and just Miami looks awful. So I think the Patriots over the Dolphins. Again, this is not betting advice. These are just things that we are seeing based on our evaluations and want to equate that to a dollar sign, so to speak.
For sure. I think that just about does it. Those are our bets. We've gone over our takes, what we expect from the Panthers this week, and what we saw from the league as a whole this week. I know we talked about coaches, but a league as a whole, So be sure to follow us on Twitter. We are on YouTube. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Like the video, dislike the video if you have to, if you don't agree with us. Just do what you got to do. But for myself, for Steven, we are Purrfect Takes, and we will catch you guys next week.